Good day, everyone. My name is Vince Gelman. Thank you so much for joining me today. I thought of a metaphor the other day that I like, that I want to share with you to provide further insight, further perspective on our chaotic global awakening. And I really love using metaphors because the gift of metaphors is that they appeal to the right brain, and it makes it harder for the left logical linear brain to grasp. And the thing is, in many ways, it's very difficult to grasp what is going on right now. In many ways, the place that it can truly be grokked is in our heart, is in our heart knowing. And because what is going on in our world right now is so full of paradox and so full of uncertainty, and it in many ways it just doesn't make rational sense why the world is collapsing and what the higher purpose is in this. So I feel metaphors are a powerful way to help elucidate a deeper understanding that transcends logical reasoning. So the metaphor that I want to share with you is I want you to imagine, to use the term of Eckhart Tolle's pain body. I want you to imagine that humanity's collective pain body is one big iceberg floating in the ocean. That's where they are usually, aren't they? In the ocean. So I want you to imagine that the pain body of humanity as a totality is one big iceberg floating through the endless seas, taking up lots of space. And why I like the iceberg as a metaphor is because where I'm going with this is that I invite you to see the iceberg as being symbolic of trauma. Now, what is the nature of trauma? Well, trauma is a state of freeze. It's a state of immobility. It's trapped, unmoving life force. It's something that got stuck in our system that is needing resolution. It's needing help. Another way of understanding this is that there's a part of ourself that is frozen in time. So when people talk about soul retrieval, they're talking about aspects of the soul that are frozen in time. And so what we're doing with soul retrieval, or what we're doing with healing, is that we're integrating these frozen or disconnected or disowned aspects of ourselves. We're reintegrating them into the wholeness of who we are. We're coming back to wholeness. Wholeness is actually what health means, and whole is related to holy. So we're returning to our holy, whole state as being complete and a perfect mirror of the totality of life on all accounts, on all measures. So when we experience trauma, there is a part of ourself that gets stuck in time. And so it's one reason that we define trauma as the eternally present past, is that though something occurred in childhood, like we were abused, it's that trauma is, and that programming that came from that experience are still impacting us today, and yet they're simultaneously frozen in time. So it's kind of both. We're carrying that trauma imprint with us in the present moment, but it's the past. It's of the past, and truly everything is happening in this now moment. But it's also helpful to understand that these are parts of ourselves that are frozen in time, or at least the illusion of time. And if we think about the ocean represents spirit. It represents our higher self. It represents our Holy Spirit. It represents oneness, and that's the timeless realm. And so we have a time-bound iceberg floating around in the timeless realm of the ocean spirit, of the ocean soul. And so the iceberg, our pain, our egoic body, is actually embraced by our Holy Spirit, is embraced and held and surrounded, or at least the bottom part in the metaphor, by our spirit. It's not actually separated, and it's actually made from that essence. It's made from that substance of ocean water, of ocean spirit. It's not separate. And yet it has an illusion of separateness because of its densification, the fact that it's floating on top. And so that's why I like this metaphor, is that it allows for the illusion of separation, and it allows for that quality of frozenness that is what trauma is. I want to just say one more thing. As a fairly experienced trauma practitioner, one thing that my clients experience when they heal is they often feel very cold in their body. Sometimes to the point of needing a jacket, and to the point of having goosebumps. They can feel very cold. And so when my clients feel cold, what that is an indicator of, and I'm not going to say every single time because there are mysteries to this, but it is safe to say that at least a big part of the time, it's the freeze response thawing in the physiology. So the freeze response is thawing, and so that coldness is being felt as it releases through the system. So healing, what often happens in healing is that we feel something as it releases out. And that's why sometimes when we heal, it often gets worse before it gets better, because as our system releases these toxic imprints, these trauma imprints, they can expand through our body and they can be felt more fully. So people can feel a lot of cold, like I said, to the point of having goosebumps and needing a jacket So if we look at this, going back to this metaphor, we got this huge iceberg, it's floating in the ocean, and it's going around, living its humdrum life in its frozen, its frozen inner template, and in its state of freeze, in its state of trauma. Remember, it's not the way I'm offering this to you is not to see the iceberg as being the totality of who we are. We also have a higher self, we have a soul, we have an innocence that's invincible, that's untarnished, and that represents the ocean. And it's not separate, right? There's a lot of talk out there I sometimes hear as being, certain teachers make it sound like the ego is separate from the soul. It's not. The soul, or the higher self, and the ego, or the soul and the higher self and the psychobiology, it's one harmonious system. Kind of like when you have with a hurricane, you have the still center of the eye of the hurricane, which is the soul, and then you have the storm around it, which is the chaotic, life. It's the chaotic egoic mind, and it's one harmonious system. So it's really important to not see our ego and our pain body as separate from the higher self. It's one harmonious system. It's not like your higher self is way up there and the human self is way down here. So it's the same with the iceberg. Yes, it's got a lot of pain in it, but it's being held and embraced and caressed by the higher self, the spirit, and it's made from that substance. So we have this iceberg, and it's floating around. It's living its very humdrum surface life, right? Going to sports games, going to the pub, watching sitcoms, humdrum, taking the kids to soccer practice, having okay sex with their partner, not very intimate, pretty mechanical. Not having the most intimate and vulnerable conversations with friends, smoking cigarettes, playing video games, all, the superficialities that we call normal. It's very normal for people to have very mechanical, emotionally divorced sex. It's very common for couples to not have sex at all, really. So this is all normal in our surface, superficial, mechanical life, And this is the consequence of being in a frozen state. And that frozen state, I want to tell you, also includes the programming. Because with trauma imprints comes programming as well. So for me, for instance, I was traumatized through sexual abuse. And what came from that trauma, or what was kind of like coalesced with that trauma, were very painful beliefs like I am bad, I am wrong, it's my fault, I am the worst. Really painful beliefs. So within that metaphor of the iceberg, I want you to also see in there these very painful beliefs. I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. Those are very common as well. So, so this is where humanity has been for a long time, and it's going around, it's floating around, and it's forgotten the ocean. It's forgotten the ocean. It's stuck in a time-bound reality, and a superficial and a surface level reality, largely governed by a frozen self. A trauma psychophysiology, as we would say. And some of these imprints are beyond this lifetime. We carry a lot of these imprints through our past lives, which are parallel lives, these karmic imprints, these samskaras. We inherit trauma and programming from our ancestors. We inherit or pick up at a cellular level the toxicity from the collective consciousness. So there's many things creating this pain body. So we're at a point now on this planet where we can't obviously live like this anymore, and we see chaos growing in the world. And so I want you to imagine that in our metaphor, what's actually happening is that there's a storm brewing, growing, a big storm, the biggest storm ever. Waves are getting bigger, splashing all over the iceberg. Thunder clouds, rain, and huge bolts of lightning that start to hit and crack and break the iceberg, split it. And so with this intense heat comes the beginning of melting. There's a melting process. More lightning comes in, and it melts it even more. And so what begins to happen is that this is the dissolution of the false self. This is the melting away of the false self. Now, if we look at a more literal level, when we do our healing work, when we transform, we must embrace our vulnerability often, and there is no rite of passage of healing and vulnerability without our tears. So our tears are it's what melts us. Our tears melt us. Our melting brings tears, and our tears brings melting. And so there's a melting of the iceberg, and that's the tearing and tearing down of the iceberg. The tearing of the iceberg and the tearing down of the iceberg. It's the melting it. And what's beautiful about this metaphor is that the same quality of that makes the iceberg is actually it just dissolves right back into the ocean. It dissolves and merges back into the ocean gradually. Our tears bring us back into the ocean. We fall into it. We dissolve into it. We allow ourselves to fall into our soul body, into the waiting arms, the loving presence of our higher self, and ultimately the divine mother of all life, prime creator God. We can no longer pretend that we're separate. We can no longer live this identity of separation. We can no longer live this very superficial, surface level life. So dissolving actually, and with our tears, melts us and reunifies us with the totality of our being. And so what if that this great storm, this growing storm on the planet, is doing this to humanity's collective pain body that it just can't continue living from anymore. See, it doesn't know. Most people don't realize how much pain they're carrying. I say this pretty regularly in my videos. People don't realize how much they're operating from a trauma physiology. One of the things that is that people confuse their personality for who they are. They forget that personality comes from the word persona, and persona in Greek means mask. So for instance, someone may be very quiet, or someone may be very loud. They may take a lot of space, for instance, in a boardroom meeting, and dominate 50% of the meeting. Someone is more passive, someone is more loud, and we say, well, that's just their personality. We confuse that. We think that's who they are, but it's actually, in many ways, an adaptation or a maladaptation. It's a survival response. If I withdraw as a child, I'm safer. If I don't take as much space, I'm less likely to get hurt. I'm more likely to get my attachment needs met. Or the opposite, if I take lots of space and be loud, I'll seem stronger. I'll become more popular. If I'm more dominant, I'm more successful. If I'm more pushy, I'm more successful. And then therefore I'll be more liked, or I'll be more approved of. And so we adapt into these different personality types, and then we pay $150 and go get a personality assessment done. And we say, oh, I am this. I just got classified as this personality type. When in fact, your personality assessment that you just paid $150 for is actually a snapshot of your current tendencies based on survival adaptations. Now, I'm not saying that everything about your personality is based on unprocessed trauma, unprocessed fear, unprocessed shame, unprocessed, etc., etc. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, though, a large part of who we think we are is actually the iceberg. And so we confuse ourselves with the iceberg because we have forgotten the totality of our being. We've forgotten the ocean that we are. And we can't continue living like that. You see, to the degree that we live with that separation consciousness of iceberg from ocean, that translates into how we relate, for instance, to Mother Earth. And we see her as separate. We treat her as separate. And that's what causes the abuse of Mother Earth, is by seeing her separate. One of the hallmarks of a truly advanced society, any advanced star nation, for instance, the Arcturians, is they live under a clear knowing that everything is one. Imagine if we all knew that everything is one, if we knew that in our heart, what would be different in how we would relate to each other, and how we would relate to Mother Earth, how we would relate to animals, how I would relate to this tree, right? Everything changes. And yet, living through this illusion of believing ourselves as the iceberg also serves a purpose, because it's through our trauma and through our pain and through our suffering that we gather divine qualities that we wouldn't have if we just knew ourselves as the ocean. So the paradox is that by experiencing ourselves as this surface level iceberg, it's through experiencing ourselves that we actually, through healing and through awakening and through going through the rite of passage, through our darkness and through our pain and coming out the other side, by going into the depths of our own darkness, we gather divine qualities like humility and compassion and wisdom and patience and forgiveness and tolerance. And so when you see someone, let's say you meet a woman and she's 75 years old and she has a quiet depths about her, there's a good chance what you're seeing is a woman who knows how to suffer. She has suffered well. And she's gathered the elixirs, the divine qualities only found in darkness. So we have been through a long rite of passage on this planet for a few thousand years in this dark age, and we are coming out of this now, and we don't need to continue identifying ourselves as this iceberg. We're really done with it. We're really done with it. We don't need to suffer to the degree we have anymore in order to learn and evolve. And yet humanity at this point in time is still very much identified with the iceberg. They're still identified with it, and they call it normal, and they call it democracy. And normal and democracy is increasingly being hit by storms and by heavy rainfall and by lightning bolts. It's being broken apart. It's being dismantled. And that's the blessing of these times. And it is the compassionate response. It is compassionate, you see. It's actually not compassionate for life to continue to allow us to ho-hum and humdrum along as a floating, superficial, surface level iceberg stuck in our trauma, stuck in time, stuck in the eternally present past, in illusion, in the illusion of separation. It is the most compassionate thing for these storms to come, to begin to break us apart. You see, breaking apart of the iceberg is representative of us falling apart. Isn't that what we do when we heal? Isn't that what we do when we go through our journey of empowerment? Is we fall apart. We fall apart emotionally. We say things, we admit things, we feel things we never have before. I'm scared. I don't know. I need help. We cry, we melt, we fall apart, and that, my friends, is a beautiful thing. And so the iceberg falling apart is symbolic of us falling apart, and us falling apart is symbolic of the iceberg falling apart. And both are pointing to the world falling apart. It's about one big falling apart so that we may experience ourselves as no longer a part, but the wholeness of the ocean. So thank you, my friends. I hope that metaphor is helpful and inspiring. And if you would like help with your journey of healing and empowerment, I got more online healing and activation ceremonies coming up pretty much every weekend, Saturday and Sunday. I'll put a link in the description. And please like, comment, subscribe, share, all that jazz. And from my heart to yours, thank you. Take care. Bye.